large industrial partners who have variable loads which can be turned on and off as the energy grid demands it. It's very difficult to get people, ordinary everyday people, to participate in this. So this alone is not enough to stabilize the grid. The other option is storage, particularly pumped hydro. This is where we get this graph and we add an extra line, charging and discharging. When you add the charging and the power together, you get the demand line. There are several different types of storage. You can divide them by how long you are storing the energy for. So not how long does the energy last, but how long are you storing it for. For ASEAN, the most important things are medium to intraday. So that is, you're storing energy for 4 to 24 hours before you use it. This is for day-night cycling of solar primarily. And multi-day storage. This is more than one day, up to about 4 or 5 days storage before you use the energy. This particularly supplements variable weather. If you have multiple days a week of cloudy weather, you need multi-day storage. Of less concern is short-term storage and seasonal storage. Short-term storage is necessary, and we will talk about it more later, but it is required in much smaller volumes, smaller energy, smaller power capacities, and it is cheaper. Seasonal storage, which is for more than a few days before you use the energy, is necessary in relatively moderate volumes, but because your solar resource is flat throughout the year, it's not necessary. Or if you have variable solar resource because of the hydroelectricity solar counter correlation, you need less than you might in another part of the world. So how do we pick between different types of storage? Here are some cost metrics. Many of you are probably familiar with levelized cost of storage. This is where you take the total cost of your system divided by all of the energy in its lifetime. You get a number in US dollars per megawatt hour. This is a good figure for comparing storage types which are being used for the same purpose. It is a very bad figure to compare storage types which are being used for different purposes. Installation cost is better for comparing storage of different purposes. Installation cost is split into two. Things can be very cheap for the power capacity and very expensive for the energy capacity, or vice versa, or very similar. But you pay different amounts for energy capacity and power capacity usually. Here's a little example comparing short-term and seasonal storage. In the short-term scenario, we have a battery which is being used for frequency and voltage control. It is being charged and discharged every hour. It is a small battery, 1 gigawatt hour, but it is being charged and discharged very often. A lot of energy is going through it. That means the levelized cost of storage is really small. Compare that with seasonal storage. It cycles once a year. It charges up all summer long and discharges all winter long. It is massive, 5,000 gigawatt hours, and it is reasonable power capacity too, 10 gigawatts. But it only cycles once a year. The energy that goes through it is much smaller. That means its levelized cost of storage is really high. In this scenario, the short-term energy storage is cheap. The seasonal is expensive. The short-term energy storage is needed for grid stability, But without the seasonal, the entire grid fails. There's not enough energy. The seasonal is more expensive, but it is absolutely necessary in this scenario. In most of your countries, seasonal storage is not required in large volumes, as I said, because of stable solar and the monsoon solar correlation, anti-correlation. But this trend holds across all of the sizes of storage. The longer you need to store energy for, the more expensive it is, but it is also necessary. So comparing lithium and pumped hydro, lithium batteries are generally quite cheap on the energy and the power front. Pumped hydro has relatively expensive power, but much cheaper energy. If you raise your dam wall by just a little bit, then you get huge amounts more water volume, huge amounts more energy capacity for a relatively small extra investment. Lithium is good for high power, low energy applications, for frequency control, for voltage control, for short-term usage. Pumped hydro is much more useful for huge energy storage, for multi-day, intraday storage. Just to recap here, the cost of storage depends on how you use the storage. Levelized cost of storage is only good to compare storage which is being used in the same way. In a solar-dominated grid, you need inverters. Solar power is DC, it needs to be AC. Grid-forming inverters adjust the voltage and the power output to make sure, to stabilize the grid, stabilize the frequency, stabilize the voltage. It acts like a synchronous generator with synthetic inertia. Pumped hydro supplies real inertia. It has an actual motor, like a coal-fired power plant. These are also good for stability. Grid-forming inverters and pumped hydro can both supply both frequency control and voltage control. This can also be supplemented by batteries, and it probably will be needed to be supplemented by batteries. Pumped hydro has relatively poor ramp rates compared to lithium batteries. Lithium batteries can ramp very fast. They're very good for fast frequency response, voltage and power control. So to recap, ASEAN region, we are concerned with medium to intraday storage, multi-day storage, 4 hours to a few days. These are some options: pumped hydro, batteries, molten salt thermal storage, and hydrogen. We have a traffic light system for saying, for short-term storage, lithium batteries are the best, and other batteries. Pumped hydro can be used, it works, but it is more expensive than batteries in the short-term application. For seasonal application, or for medium, intraday, and seasonal applications, pumped hydro is king. It is the best. These traffic lights are primarily informed by self-discharge rates. You know, when you charge your phone, you don't use it, but you come back a few hours later and it's dropped 10%. That's self-discharge. Lithium batteries have a high self-discharge rate. Pumped hydro has a very low self-discharge rate. Cycling effects. You cycle lithium batteries, you charge them and discharge them, they wear over time. They lose energy capacity. And ramp rates. So as I said, lithium batteries ramp very fast. Pumped hydro ramps slower. All of those things inform what application your storage technology is good for. And just to reiterate here, we're talking about how long you are storing the energy before using it, not how long you can run your storage for. So for our medium term to multi-day storage, we're looking at 3 options: pumped hydro, thermal, and hydrogen. Of these, pumped hydro and thermal are considered, well, pumped hydro is very mature. We have been doing pumped hydro since the 1800s, or hydroelectricity since the 1800s, same technology. Thermal storage is relatively mature, but it is relatively expensive. Synthetic fuel, hydrogen, is not mature and it is inefficient. Of these, only pumped hydro has been implemented at scale, and it has been implemented successfully in multiple places around the world. Here are some examples. Australia, Tumut 3. This is an on-river hydro site. Generation capacity of 1.8 gigawatts. Can pump 600 megawatts. It has only 150 meters of head, which is not a huge amount. A water volume of 6 gigaliters and a reservoir area of 19 kilometers squared. This is an off-river site in Italy. 1,000 megawatts, 500 meters head, a lot higher. It has the same water volume, but it only takes up 1 kilometer squared. Australia's Tumut 3 takes up 19 kilometers squared on river. Presenzano in Italy takes up 1 kilometer squared for the same energy storage capacity and a just slightly lower power. Off-river, on-river, which is better? Off-river. Off-river is better. Closed loop waterways means that there is generally no conflicting water use problems. You don't have to dam a river. Smaller footprint, but the same power off-river. Lower technical risk. On a river, you have to manage floods, 1 in 10,000 year floods. Artificial reservoirs don't have this problem. There are hundreds more sites for off-river power storage, energy storage. Hundreds more. And they take the same time to build. So in summary, ASEAN grids are growing rapidly. They need to decarbonize for all sorts of reasons: technical, legal, public. They need substantial energy storage to supplement the grid. This will be both batteries and probably pumped hydro. They are used for different purposes. Run-of-river hydroelectricity in some countries will support solar. Solar will not support hydro. Hydro will support solar. And pumped hydro will supply vital large-scale energy storage. It is the most cost-effective solution, and it is solved, it is cheap, it is easy. We have been doing it for a very long time. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Harry, for the presentation. So yeah, now come to we will have 1.5 hour long session, so it's quite long. So I would like to encourage you to ask a lot of questions because we have plenty of time to discuss anything that you are curious about. So at the start, may I invite anyone from the...
I've got about a 5-minute short presentation.
Yeah, okay. Now inviting Professor Andrew to have presentation. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is a short presentation that I hope just sets the scene for the discussion that we would have. Pretty much all of the technical detail has now been presented by us and it's time for discussion. Just to remind you that the key parameters when you're thinking about pumped hydro are large scale, gigawatts and tens of gigawatt hours makes everything work cheaper and better per unit. And because ASEAN has a lot of people, you may as well go for big scale because you'll need that storage eventually. Large head is the most important geographical parameter. Heads in the range 800 to 1600 meters, however, do need special consideration because you might need a two-stage system, because if you put a 1600 meter head onto a conventional pump turbine, you'll probably destroy it. But a big advantage of large head is small flooded areas. If you double the head, then you halve the flooded area for an otherwise identical system. So large slope, in other words, large head and small separation between the two reservoirs. Large water to rock ratio, so you move the rock to make the dam wall and you get a very large amount of water. That's better than only a small amount of water for that amount of rock. It's obviously good to have short transmission to a 500 kV backbone, but it's important to understand these are billion-dollar projects and you can afford to build 50 or 100 kilometer long transmission if you need to. The transmission is significant, but it's not overwhelmingly expensive compared to the cost of the pumped hydro system. Obviously, you need good geology, and you find that out when you do the pre-feasibility drilling. The fact that there are thousands of good sites means that if you come across a very bad rock, you don't need to try and work around that. You just go to another site. So unlike in a river system where you have very limited number of sites, here you have many sites and you can walk around a problem rather than solve it. Water to rock ratio, water availability is often talked about as difficult. Well, it's not. When you apply that pumped hydro equation, energy equals mass times gravity times head, you quickly work out that very small amount of water stores a lot of energy if it's got a big head. And typically for Class AA or Class AAA sites, it's about half a gigalitre per gigawatt hour. And this is a very small fraction of water used for agriculture. It's very, very small. And so water is simply not an issue in ASEAN, not even in Australia, which is a hot, dry climate. Obviously, you have to carefully consider environmental and social impact. All the sites in our atlas are outside protected land on world protected land databases, but there could be protected land or sensitive land that we have not excluded. That is obviously almost the first thing you do. You have a look at the site, you see if there's any obvious problem with flooding this or that piece of land. And remember, you can zoom down in our atlas to 30-meter resolution, so you can see which tree gets flooded, which house gets flooded, and which tree does not. And these are billion-dollar investments, so there is substantial local employment required, which is normally a pretty good thing. So when you go to our pumped hydro atlas, it's important to realize that there's a wide range of costs in that atlas. So the difference between the best sites that we found and the worst sites that we display is a factor of 10, going from Class E all the way down to Class AAA, spans 10 times, a tenfold decrease in cost. So you'd only build Class B, C, D, or E if you really don't have any other options. But most of ASEAN, you wouldn't even bother with anything other than AAA or AA because you have so many options in that category. In other countries, that's not the case. ASEAN is lucky. They've got, they're spoiled for choice. You also have to consider when is storage actually needed. In fact, The solar and wind has to come before the storage. You don't need storage if you don't have much solar and wind. So the ASEAN power grids now are stable, running on coal and gas mainly, with hydro in some countries. You don't need storage until you get a lot of solar and wind. But you don't need storage until you do need storage. So if you push ahead with lots of solar and wind and don't think about storage, you will get into trouble. So you need to be thinking about storage, but not necessarily building it when solar and wind really start to take off in your country. And you have to keep in mind that affluence is rapidly growing, and that translates directly to energy demand per person is rapidly growing. Population is growing. There is going to be a very rapid switch to electricity for vehicles. China will hit 50% in June. 50% of new sales will be plug-in vehicles, and that will go to 80 or 90% soon after. And I think ASEAN is just a few years behind China. It will go the same way as China. And regional electrification, regional interconnection reduces the need for storage. So we looked at this quite closely for Australia. And if each state in Australia went it alone and developed 100% renewable energy just within itself, you need 5 times more storage than if we interconnected the states. So, but that's Australia, and we have a winter, and the storage needs are driven by a wet, windless week in winter. In ASEAN, you don't get that sort of poor weather for long periods. So the drive for regional interconnection is much weaker in ASEAN than it is in Australia because you have more stable sunshine. That said, the fact that Vietnam and the Philippines have got lots of wind, that's a nice complement to solar in other parts of ASEAN. So Vietnam and Philippines can make a very interesting electricity business selling wind power into other ASEAN states to reduce the amount of storage needed in those other ASEAN states. I just draw your attention to the fact that Australia is at 40% renewables now. That's 33% solar wind, 7% hydro, and we have almost no new storage. But we have a flood of storage on the way because we are going to 82% in 6 years' time, and we better have that storage ready when we get up around 50, 60, 70, 80%. We will definitely need a lot of storage then. And pump hydro does take a few years to get built. Other things that can also happen is that coal power plants learn new tricks. So this is cycling every day of coal power plants. So any coal engineer who says that his plant or her plant must run constant 24/7 is not being subjected to proper market forces. In Australia, the black coal plant and the brown coal plant all cycle in most days. And of course, gas cycles as well. And this is another form of storage in that if you can load follow with the coal and gas plant while the coal and gas is being phased out, then you delay the need for storage. All right, so now we come to modelling. And before you build any storage, you need to find out how much you need. And for that, you need high resolution modelling. So you can do short listing of pump hydro sites, but that should be in parallel with high resolution modelling of 100% or 90% renewable energy systems. So my recommendation for ACE, for example, would be go and model 100% renewable energy. Don't just satisfy yourself with 40, 50%. Go and look at 100%. It's not very difficult, and it produces very surprising results that 100% renewables is actually cheaper than sticking with fossil fuels if you put the right numbers in. So the first point is focus on technology you can actually buy. That's solar, wind, transmission, storage. and demand management, storage being pumped hydro and batteries. All the rest is arm waving. So modular nuclear reactors, carbon capture and storage, clean hydrogen, you can't buy it. It's not available. And this whole job will be done by 2050. Solar and wind reducing in price, rapidly increasing in scale, far in excess of what the fossil fuels are doing now. You need magical growth rates for anything other than solar and wind to challenge them for mass generation. It's not worth wasting time modelling something that will not be important until mid-century or after or never. Carbon capture and storage and nuclear have both failed in the global marketplace against solar and wind because they have almost zero market share. And that really tells you something. All the arm waving and rhetoric does not get around the fact that solar and wind are cheap and nuclear, carbon capture and storage are expensive. So in order to do a high resolution model, you need lots of data. So you should do it for at least 10 years. 10 years of solar data, 10 years of wind data, 10 years of demand data at hourly resolution or better. That means you find out how much solar, how much wind, how much demand for every hour for 10 years. That's 87,600 data points at least. And if you can do it for 20 years, so much the better. And the reason for this is that you can have good years and you can have bad years. And your system stability is driven by how you can cope with a terrible week or two where there's almost no sun and no wind. And if you don't do it for many years, you don't capture those difficult years, which is what drives the amount of storage that you need. You need to model future energy demand. There's no point modeling current energy demand because you're not a solar wind dominated system. You need to look ahead to electrification of everything, rising affluence, rising population, and rapidly rising solar and wind fraction. And for example, in ASEAN, I would suggest you model your Singapore, which is currently 10 megawatt hours per person per year, which is 5 times the ASEAN average. So you can get an idea of what your grid will look like when you have industrialized. But then you need to go beyond that to 20 megawatt hours per person per year, because you have to account for electrification of transport, heating, and industry, which will be happening in parallel with you building your solar and wind. So now we come to an important point. 20 megawatt hours per person per year is 10 times the current ASEAN average of 2. So all the electricity generation, technology, transmission, and storage you have now is a small fraction of what you will need in mid-century. What we're really arguing and discussing is going from 2 to 20, not going from 0 to 20. So you keep your existing coal power stations and gas power stations, but you don't build any more. You build new solar and wind for all your future energy demand increases. And that means that you get to a clean, green energy system in 2050, because by then your existing coal and gas power stations will have retired. So stop building fossil fuel power stations and the problem goes away by mid-century. And your modelling should reflect that. You will find it increasingly difficult to get finance, insurance, and technology to build new coal and gas. It is a dying art. So you can use batteries and pumped hydro, but the initial thing to look at is an energy balance rather than a power balance. So you're looking at multi-hour resolution rather than focusing on will we meet the evening peak on tomorrow week. You're looking at energy over hours, days, months, years to work out how much large-scale, long-duration storage you need. Then having done the energy balance, you go back and look in detail at the power balance to make sure that you can indeed meet the future peak demand. And you have to add in, of course, transmission costs. So you end up with generation plus storage plus transmission as the total cost of your energy system in your model. So there's quite a few models around. We have one that we developed called FIRM. And that basically matches supply and demand of energy for every hour of every year over 10 or 20 or 30 years. And we have done firm model analyses of ASEAN as a whole and Indonesia and Malaysia, and of course Australia and several other countries. And it's not so difficult to do a similar analysis of any country within ASEAN or any group of countries within ASEAN if there's strong regional interconnection. And when you've done the modelling, you've picked numbers for the costs of each of the parameters in the model. You need to then alter the costs for every one of the important parameters and get a very wide range of solutions with a wide range of input costs to work out what is critical. And the central message is nothing is critical. If you work out what that optimum arrangement of solar, wind, storage and transmission is, and then you go a long way off optimum for any one of those parameters, it doesn't change the result very much. This is good news. So if you're constrained with wind or constrained with solar or constrained with hydro storage or whatever, and you have to move to some other solution, it won't make a lot of difference. It's cheap because solar and wind in the end are cheap. So we've done quite a few studies, as I mentioned. This is the results of one of them. All the countries in ASEAN plus Timor-Leste. And we model 3 scenarios. We pick high costs for everything, for the solar, the wind, the transmission and the storage, then a medium cost scenario, then a low cost scenario. We're almost certain to end up in a low cost scenario in 10 years' time. But you know, people reading this information can make their own choices. And as you can see, most countries have energy that is much the same. Laos has the lowest because it's got so much low-cost hydro. And Indonesia would be among the highest because its hydro resources per person are relatively small. And if you average them, you end up with somewhere between $80 and $100 per megawatt hour. This includes the cost of the generation and enough storage and enough transmission to make the whole system work and have no black hours in 10 or 20 years of modelling. So this is all quite straightforward, and it is open. We'd love to work with ACE to model ASEAN or any country within ASEAN. And you end up with a surprising result that you have costs even at today's prices for solar and wind that are competitive with today's prices of fossil fuels. And the one thing you can be sure of is that the cost of solar and wind is going down. Importantly, it turns out in ASEAN that strong interconnection doesn't make much difference. It helps some countries, but in the main, it's not very important because everyone has got pretty good solar, and the solar doesn't change much with the seasons. Okay.
Hello again. Nice to be here and to host again the second part of this session presentation and also discussion. I hope you are refreshed with the snacks at the back, and please feel free to take it along the way when you are learning with the presentation and so on. So without further ado, I would like to invite Dr. Shahid Ali to share about the Australian lessons learned and how it can help ASEAN in building the pumped hydro storage. Yeah, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, in this presentation, I'll be providing the highlight of the ongoing pumped hydro or the completed one in Australia as well in the ASEAN countries. And what are their statuses. So let's start. Okay. Okay, so we start with the general picture that where the hydro status is and where the pumped hydro. So we can see that until 2022, the global hydropower generation has increased to almost 70 gigawatt. Like, and you see that pumped hydro contribution is about 175 gigawatt worldwide, and until 2022 is like the total hydropower generation, including the pumped hydro, is like 13.97 gigawatt. This is the general picture of Australia as well as the ASEAN countries. You can see that in terms of pumped hydro, Australia is leading, and following up is Thailand and the Philippines. But in most of the other ASEAN countries, we don't see as much happening. All the new projects are coming in, but not presently available. In terms of hydro, you see Vietnam is the leading, and the second is Laos, and then Australia and the rest of the countries. About Australia, currently there are 3 pumped hydro schemes that are currently operational. That is Tumut 3, Wivenhoe Dam, and the Shoalhaven. You can see the capacities they have. And about 15 to 20 pumped hydro schemes are at various stages of investigations. And for example, in Queensland, the Keystone pumped hydro is underway. That's going to be the world's first brownfield pumped hydro on the disused gold mines. That is capacity about 250 megawatt for 8 hours and to be completed by 2024. And that's an off-river system. And obviously, Australia is like is one of the best sites in the world for generating renewable. We have really good solar power capacity as well as wind. And further, the world's largest pumped hydro is going to be built in Queensland. That is Pioneer Burdekin is underway. It's going to be about 5 gigawatt 24-hour storage. Hopefully we complete it by 2032. And there's also like off-river system in New South Wales. Construction is underway on Snowy 2 and to be completed by 2026. In Tasmania, Sithana Pumped Hydro has been proposed, or they're working on this. That's going to be 750 megawatt and provide 20 hours of storage. Now coming to the Philippines, as per the International Renewable Energy Agency report, like 736 megawatt of pumped hydro capacities at the end of 2021 was available. And Prime Infra is developing about 400 megawatt pumped hydro in Pakil, Laguna province, and the Calayan pumped hydro in Calabarzon region in the Philippines on the Luzon is also planned. That has capacity about 796 megawatt. And that's expected to be completed by 2031. You can see the Philippines has really good solar power capacity as well as good wind. And Philippines aims to increase the share of renewables in its power mix from 21% in 2022 to 35% by 2030 and 50% by 2040. So obviously they need more pumped hydro. Coming to Cambodia, in 2022, hydropower capacity in Cambodia amounted to about 1.33 gigawatt. No pumped hydro in operation thus far. And pumped hydro using an existing reservoirs is under investigation. And the hydropower rise from, is expected to rise from 1558 megawatt in 2030 to around 3,000 megawatt by 2040. Cambodia targets about more than 3,000 megawatt of solar power by 2040. And you can see that Cambodia has really good solar potential as well as a little bit of wind. In Vietnam, in 2022, the hydropower capacity amounted to about 23 gigawatt and no operational pumped hydro scheme thus far. They plan to add about 36 megawatt of pumped hydro by 2035. And really difficult to pronounce these names. And the goal is to achieve about net zero emissions by 2050. Requirements about 150 gigawatt of solar and 170 gigawatt of solar by 2050. They have very good, good solar potential and very good wind. In Malaysia, the hydropower capacity is about 6.2 gigawatt. No operational pumped hydros thus far. And Malaysia is currently exploring the use of pumped hydro in the energy storage. ANU has delivered like 3 workshops thus far there. And Malaysia is also aiming to reach renewable energy installed capacity of 40% by 2035. They have good solar potential and average wind. Similarly, in Laos, the hydropower is the largest source of power generation, and it was around 9.2 gigawatt in 2022. No operational pumped hydro scheme thus far, but Laos is planning to build a pumped hydro storage hydropower dam, and it has capacity to produce about 10 to 15 gigawatt of solar power and about 100 gigawatt of wind power. So very good wind and good solar. And in Indonesia, as of 2023, the hydropower capacity was around 6.82 gigawatt. No operational pumped hydro scheme thus far. The first pumped hydro that is under development is the Upper Sisakan pumped hydro in West Java. Capacity is about over like 1 gigawatt to be completed by 2025 timeline. Solar is booming and wind is as well. So the total renewable share is expected to be more than 31% by 2050. So as we showed yesterday that about the pumped hydro potential in the ASEAN countries. So we found like more than 60,000 good sites here that can provide like 2 million gigawatt hours of storage, 100 times more than what is needed to support 100% renewable energy in the ASEAN countries. And specifically about Indonesia, that has more than 26,000 good sites with 0.8 million gigawatt hour storage. And only even if just a quick scanning through the AAA sites, we found that there are like around 18 sites. So they don't really need to develop all those. Like they can be choosy and pick up the ones that are the best if they go after them. So, and then again, we pretty much presented this slide yesterday, but again, going through that, comparing the pumped hydro and the batteries. The scalability of pumped hydro is like 100 times more better than batteries, and the cost of energy storage of pumped hydro is smaller compared to batteries, and the cost of storage power is moderate. Lifetime pumped hydro have like 100 of years, you know, and could be more, but batteries have like 10 to 15 years. And the working material is H2O water that's non-toxic, but the batteries, they use electrochemicals. And the roles, they can provide storage for like hours and days. And batteries can be for seconds and hours. And the ancillary services, black start, stabilization, and arbitrage. And the lane use is really small for almost both of them. The operation and maintenance are low. So the lessons learned, looking at these, the current statuses and the completed and the planned one, pumped hydros across the ASEAN and in Australia, is that solar and wind will continue to dominate global energy landscape. And solar surpasses wind worldwide and in Asian countries nationwide due to the widespread availability. And almost all Asian countries are seeking pumped hydro as a storage solution. Off-river, that on greenfield sites are becoming more common because of the lesser environmental and social issues. And ANU, obviously, the global atlas of ANU that provides a comprehensive guide on pumped hydro off-river sites around the world. And the ASEAN nations, including Indonesia, have ample pumped hydro development opportunities to go 100% renewable. And pumped hydro development supports ambitious renewable energy transition in the face of climate change. So pumped hydro is the future, along with solar. So that's it from my side. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Shahid, for the presentation. It's interesting that you have identified the how the existing pump hydro in ASEAN and how actually ASEAN can consider each ASEAN countries can consider to adopt the pump hydro based on the existing solar and wind capacity. Again, thank you very much. And if you have any questions, please keep it until we are going to the discussion session. Now, I would like to invite Pak Zainal Arifin, the Executive Vice President of the Renewable Energy of PLN, to update about the Upper Ciscan project. Thank you, Pak. The floor is yours.
Hello, good morning, everyone. First of all, I would like to thanks to ASEAN Energy Center for inviting us, PLN, the Indonesia listed company, to share about the update of hydroelectric, pump hydro energy storage project in Indonesia. I would like to start with the background here. How big the resource of potential of renewable energy in Indonesia. So we have identified some potential not utilized yet here in Indonesia. So this is the point. So the PLTAM is hydro. We have the identified potential is more than 30 gigawatt, and the red one PLTP is geothermal 18.1 gigawatt, and the wind also good enough, or more than 17 gigawatt, and also the for the PLTS it means solar power. We only calculate the project already in the pipeline in our RUBTL Indonesia Master Electricity Planning, and the potential for the solar PV floating in Minister of Public Work reservoir. For the potential PV floating in at Minister of Work reservoir only, the potential reach more than 13 gigawatt for a solar farm. And also the last one, very small, is bio. Bio can be biomass, biogas, and waste to energy. So totally, the identified of renewable energy potential in Indonesia is about 87.4 gigawatt. So this is the breakdown. You can see that based on the each province around Indonesia. So for achieving net zero emission in Indonesia, we already commit to achieve net zero emission in 2060 or sooner. We already launched the RUPTL, the Indonesia Master Plan of Electricity Planning, and until 2030. We would like to build the 20.9 gigawatt new renewable energy. So we can look the picture here. The composition more than half is hydro. We would like to build hydro is 10.4 gigawatt. The thermal panas bumi, sorry, some my presentation still in bahasa. Geothermal 3.3 gigawatt, VRE 5.3 gigawatt, bioenergy more only 0.6 gigawatt, and another is hybrid is about 1.3 gigawatt. That is the update at the end of last year. So until right now, from 20.9, we already proceed already at the pipeline of procurement almost 15 gigawatt. So this is the stages. Even though the project is already at COD, only still low, only 1 gigawatt so far. But the remaining in the construction, the procurement process, and also the study and funding. So for this planning, we would like to build new hydropower 10.4 gigawatt. Okay, sorry. Can be back. Okay, this is the more detail about the 10.4 gigawatt. Actually, consists of 318 locations scattered around Indonesia, with the the investment project units 22.66 billion US dollar. So this is the list of project already and the procurement. Next. Okay. And for the 10.4 gigawatt, about 40% is pump hydro energy storage. Back one page. Okay. Agak delay. No, okay. This is the pump hydro energy storage project in Indonesia, based on our planning, yeah, until 2030, consists of 5 locations. The one location in Sumatra, 500 megawatt, 4 locations in Java Island, Jatiluhur, Upper Kisokan, Matenggeng, and Girindulu in East Jawa Timur, East Java. This is the update. The project still on study for Sumatra, Jatiluhur still on the planning. Upper Kisokan, the most advanced, already in construction, and will be COD in 2028. And Matenggeng also still on planning for making the ED and the document, and also the Girindulu still on making feasibility study. This is about the Upper Kisokan. Yeah. This is mostly will be the largest and the first pump storage in Indonesia. So there is 4 package. So this is a multi-package project. Package 1, this is about the civil, can be lot 2, lot 1A, and lot 1B. Lot 1A is about upper and lower dam, and lot 1B is waterways, powerhouse, and shipyard. And another is electromechanical, still on planning for procurement, and also package 3, procurement process transmission line, and the package 4 is hydraulic metal work. The total project 755 million US dollar, coming from the development bank and also from our funding, World Bank, AIB, and also from PLN. This is the EPC contract for Upper Kisokan. As I already mentioned, there is 4 packages. So the package 1 is package lot A and B already on construction, ongoing. And the package B, we estimate that August will be done for the procurement. We hope that the winner can be chosen, yeah, this August. And package 3 will be a further proceed. We estimate that in November, this November will be launched for the transmission line. And package 4, it is hydraulic, will be next this July, yeah. And also this is already we choose the contractor, the China Gezaba Group company. This is the simple diagram of the Upper Kisokan. what the benefit of this project for Indonesia? The first is to support, of course, Indonesia net zero emission target, and also we hope that the project can reduce the electricity cost production for the peak season in Jawa Madura Bali system. And number 3 is also the function to be spinning reserve. And the number 4 also to be black start to improve utility factor and base load and load factor for Jamali system. And also the last one is, of course, increase renewable energy penetration and supporting to achieve NDC for reduce CO2 emission. For this project, we hope can increase the penetration of renewable energy up to 0.9, almost 1% of overall of electricity fuel mix in Indonesia. Delay, yeah. Okay. This is timeline of Aperti Sokan, yeah. We have so many problems here, but actually the problem coming from the type of project, because the project is multi-project, consists of several contractors. It's not easy to align several contractors with the different KPI. The first problem we have is the quality of the local contractor cannot be matched with the international contractor. That's the problem. The first problem we have here during the construction. So the dispute take longer time until the funding is the funding is end, yeah, and we waiting for to get the funding again, start refunding. This the problem we have during the Aperti Sokan project, and right now we start again to start the procurement for another package. This is the master schedule of Aperti Sokan package 1A and 1B. So we hopefully the project can be COD in 2028. Yeah, here is the timeline. This is the activity. This is for the civil work yellow and low reservoir and reservoir, dam, powerhouse, and this for another package for electromechanical work, still on planning for procurement. Hopefully will be done in August this year, and also for the transmission line will be on procurement. Actually, we hope that we can done in this November, and also for hydraulic metal work will be in July this year. This is the progress. Actually, still low. Lot 1A. We hope that this is the progress for last month, February this year. We plan that the progress is 2.98%, actual 2.86%. And this is the lot 1B. Yeah. Also there is a delay, but not too much. This is the more detail of the picture, yeah. The progress until the last month. Upper dam, lot 1A, power intake, and base camp, and CVC. This also for another picture to show the temporary access road. We have several temporary access road and intake. And what the issue we have here? Actually, this is the already classic problem, land acquisition, yeah. And the second is social environmental impact, and also permit and license is also we deal with so many department and also local government about issuing permit and license. And also this is the specific for Indonesia, local content. We have industrial minister decree regulated the local content, especially for the power generation project in Indonesia. What the problem? All development bank cannot accept the local content clause at their guideline procurement. So we start at the moment. What bank cannot proceed the funding? Yeah. So we have stuck at the moment, and the last one I already mentioned is about the multi-package project. So yeah, it is challenging. We try to align several contractors with a different quality. I think that's all of my presentation. Hopefully it can be useful for you all. Thank you. Good morning.
We will resume to our next session today, which is the sixth session with the topic of exploring PHES bankability and financial models for ASEAN. And this session will be moderated by Mr. Muhammad Ilham Rizaldi, the research analyst of the SRE Department of ASEAN Center for Energy. I will invite Mr. Ilham to lead the session.
Thank you, Veronica. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, and I hope everyone enjoy their lunch and also still will be very excited for this next session of discussion. So before lunch, just want to get quite a recap about we have already delved deeper into the project, and we also have an example project from the Indonesia PLN. And we're going to move on to the next session, which we will explore the pumped hydro energy storage bankability and financial models for ASEAN. And we will have, firstly, we'll have a presentation from Professor Andrew Lakers, which is entitled Key Parameters for Assessing PHES Project Capability. So I would invite the Professor. Thank you.
Well, thank you. So I'm not going to tell you how bankability happens in ASEAN because I don't know, but I can tell you how it happens in Australia, and if that's useful, then good. So it's obviously important before you build a pumped hydro that you have done some good energy modeling, high resolution hour by hour energy modeling, so that you know you actually need it, or that you can predict when you will need it. So the short listing of good sites and the high resolution modeling go together, and then comes the pre-feasibility analysis, and then the feasibility analysis, and so forth. But always you're refining your business models. And because there's so little solar and wind in ASEAN, a new pumped hydro here will very likely change its role as the solar and wind proportion rises. So it might be used today for meeting evening peak periods, or supporting the grid in case of failure of a coal power station, for example. But in the future, it would be used to support solar and wind. But the good thing is that a pumped hydro system will last 100 years, and it can have many different uses over that 100 years. So in Australia, there's 2 pumped hydros being built now, and there's about another dozen which are under serious consideration. And these are all aimed at 2030, when we will be at 82% solar renewable energy. So we need to get onto building the pumped hydro now or soon to meet that requirement. And one of them is in an old gold mine in North Queensland, and that is private. And one of them is Snowy 2.0, which is large, and that is government owned. It's a private government company. So acts like a company. It has to make a return on investment and give dividends to the government, but it is government money. So short-term storage like batteries or small pumped hydros can be owned by private companies, but for very large systems like 1,000 gigawatt hours, there could be a mixture of government and private money, or it could be all government money, or it could be all private money, but it just depends on the circumstances. But really, the open Australian market has been crucial in getting the solar and wind revolution happening in Australia, and it is a work in progress, and there are still many gaps and problems which have not yet been solved. But the key point is that none of the problems have been overly large. They've all been soluble. We somehow muddled through, but whether we made the best choices, I don't know. However, it's open to anyone in ASEAN to come and look and take away what's good and leave behind what doesn't work for you. So the ownership of assets in the renewable energy ecosystem in Australia is shown on this slide. So all of the solar and wind farms are private, all of them. There's no government money in solar and wind farms. There's no government money at all in rooftop solar. There's essentially no subsidies, or there's a few tiny subsidies floating around here and there which are fading away, will be all gone within a few years. But effectively, the Australian electricity system doesn't have subsidies, except for the enormous subsidy of no carbon price. But there's no direct subsidies to renewables or to coal and gas for that matter. So transmission assets are almost all private, but because that's a monopoly, it's a regulated private monopoly, and the private company can build a new transmission, but it has to pass a test called the RE-SSN test, which says that this is good value for money. And then if it passes that test, the regulator says, you can build this asset and you will get a fixed rate of return on your investment. So transmission companies are motivated to build lots of transmission because then they get lots of return on, a very secure return on assets. And the RE-SSN test is supposed to put a check on that unbridled wish to build transmission. This has been a major problem, perhaps the biggest problem in Australia, and that is that the RE-SSN test was designed in a grid where electricity demand was not growing, and it was pretty much all met by coal and gas. So the transmission went to the coal power stations, but now the transmission has to go to where the solar and wind farms are, and that's not in the same place. So an enormous amount of transmission has to be built, and the test of a permission to build new transmission has not worked. And so I think now that the state governments and the federal government have got tired of the delay in transmission, which is the key constraint on solar and wind deployment, and they're going to simply override the system and build a new system, or simply designate that we're going to build 10 new transmission lines here, there, and the other place, and just get on with it. So that will be a huge relief when that happens, because Australia has been building about 6 to 7 gigawatts per year of solar, about half on wind, half on roof and half in solar and wind farms. So that's 3 or 4 gigawatts a year of solar and wind farms. But that's dropped down to about 1 gigawatt in the last year or so because of transmission, lack of transmission. The existing transmission is saturated, and new transmission will allow us to push that up to 6 or 7 gigawatts per year of new solar and wind farms, plus 3 or 4 gigawatts of rooftop makes 10 gigawatts a year, which is what's needed to reach our target of 82%. So I think it's very likely that the transmission problem will be sorted out, but that has been the biggest impediment in Australia, and probably will be in your country too. And it's not because transmission's expensive. Transmission's cheap. The problem has been social license and pushback, politically motivated or for some other reason. So storage, all the batteries are privately owned. Government doesn't own any batteries. And as I mentioned, pumped hydro, half is owned by government, half is private. And the key benefit of all this is it's private money and private risk. And the government is not having to provide the money, and it's not taking the risk. And as I mentioned in an earlier item, in response to a question, often the easiest way to get started along this path is to take the brakes off rooftop solar by allowing anybody to connect to the grid. As happens in Australia, anybody, solar farm, wind farm, rooftop solar, anybody can connect to a grid. And once you get your rooftop solar market up towards a gigawatt, prices crash because you have a lot of skilled people. At the moment, there are almost no skilled people, but after you've built a gigawatt of rooftop solar, there is a lot of skilled people. And supply chains, in particular for inverters and panels, get sorted out. And these people who know how to build rooftop solar will also now know how to build a solar farm. And so the industry just takes off. And at that stage, you can introduce local content laws because you'll have enough people knowing the industry that they could realistically bring in the capital required to build a solar cell factory, for example. But it's all about getting scale so that you can get the prices down. So in Australia, the price is $7,000 for a 10 kilowatt system on your roof, turnkey. And from contacting a company to do it to having it done might be a week or 2 weeks. There's almost no bureaucracy. The solar rooftop company fills in a few forms, lodges them by computer. The approval comes back within a few days. It's all so simple and so cheap. And so you end up with the price of energy from your rooftop being about 2.5 US cents per kilowatt hour. And I don't know what people pay in subsidized prices, perhaps in various ASEAN countries, but that is very cheap electricity. And that's why 1/3 of the population already has rooftop solar. And by the end of this decade, 2/3 of the population will have rooftop solar, as well as just about every single business that has a rooftop that's suitable. So effectively, that's just reiterating. Important point, it's very cheap power, it's private money, it's private risk. No government money at all. Almost no government involvement, apart from regulation and getting the bad boys, the cowboys out of the industry, because of course there'll always be people who say, I will build you a solar system for half the price, and it fails after 1 year. So there's mechanisms to stop those people because everybody who puts solar on a roof has to be accredited. And to pass accreditation, you must have the right skill and the right financial structure. So we learnt the hard way early on that there are lots of people willing to take your money and not deliver a good service, but that's the case with every single industry. And that's what you learn in the first gigawatt of rooftop solar, and then it just becomes easy. And the grid remains stable. There were lots of people who would loudly proclaim that the Australian grid will collapse when we've got 500,000 rooftop solar or 1 million. Well, now we're up to 3.5 million and the grid has not collapsed. In fact, rooftop solar is a key part of the grid. It is, in fact, the largest power source in a power station in Australia now. It's larger than any of the coal power stations. We've got 34 gigawatts of rooftop solar for a country of 27 million people. That's 1.2 kilowatts per person on roof. And it's going to double before 2030. So I don't know much about bankability, not being a banker, but I can just say the obvious things, that In ASEAN, you go straight to the AAA or AA sites. You wouldn't bother with anything less because you've got so many of them. And that means you've got very small footprints for flooded land because the head is going to be large, which shrinks the area of land flooded. Obviously, you need high quality engineering, good advice, good pre-feasibility studies and feasibility studies. And the four income streams from pumped hydro, long duration storage, is arbitrage. That means you buy cheap solar electricity during the day and sell it during peak periods at triple the price or more. So in fact, in Australia, the price of electricity goes negative on every sunny and windy day. That means you get paid to take the energy away. So if you've got a battery or a pumped hydro, then of course, that's when you pump and store. You're getting paid to take the energy away because the coal power stations are load following, but they can't load follow all the way down to zero. And in the state of South Australia, it's got solar, wind, and gas, and the solar wind fraction is now about 70%, but often goes to 140%. And there's only a skinny transmission to the eastern states. And so in South Australia, in particular, the price of electricity often goes negative. And in fact, in South Australia, for some hours of last spring, the rooftop solar alone was enough for the entire state. And South Australia has excellent grid stability. It's got no hydro, no pumped hydro. It's got some condensers, synchronous condensers. It's got some batteries. It's got a skinny connector to the east coast, and it's got a small amount of gas backup. It's stable. So anyone who tells you that high levels of solar and wind can't be made stable is simply wrong. Come and look at South Australia in particular, but Australia in general. So arbitrage is obviously one source of revenue. A second is ancillary services, and this market is just now starting to reach maturity in Australia. So that's black start in case the grid collapses, or it's frequency and voltage regulation in conjunction with batteries and grid forming inverters that provide synthetic inertia. Then there's reserve storage. So some storages are paid to remain half full at least. So the owners can play with half of their storage doing arbitrage, but the other half they're paid to just keep in reserve. And then finally, there's national energy resilience. So you could imagine in the future when solar and wind become very high proportion, that long duration, large storages will be paid to simply be there in case the grid collapses in a neighboring country, or warfare or trade dispute, or whatever. It's simply in-country, large-scale, long-term storage. The local content is high for most of the renewable energy industry, with the exception of batteries. And so some countries, I think, are choosing pumped hydro over batteries because the pumped hydro is in their own country and is built using their own country labour, with just a little bit of money or quite a lot of money actually, for the pump turbine, which would typically be imported, but that's not a large fraction of the total cost of the system. The local solar panel manufacturing will obviously be high on the agenda as the solar revolution sweeps over ASEAN, as it is in every other country. So ASEAN, at a rough estimate, will need about 8 gigawatts of solar, 8,000 gigawatts. And the price of solar is falling so fast that that will probably only cost $1 trillion for all of ASEAN. So when you divide that by 25 years, because that money is spread over the period between now and 2050 or 2060, and then divide that by 800 million people, it turns out to be $50 US per person per year to buy the solar panels. So being in the solar panel manufacturing business will not be a large money spinner because the price is so low and keeps falling. There certainly will be profits to be made, but it's not going to be a huge money spinner. Also, unlike oil, if, for example, China were to cut the supply of solar panels to your country, it would take months or years before you had a crisis. Whereas if the Middle East cuts the supply of oil to your country, you have a problem in a few weeks. So solar panels are not a strategic asset in the same way that oil supply today might be, because it takes a long time for that problem to become apparent. And if China ever played that sort of game, then you would have highly motivated people in Europe, North America, India, and ASEAN who would say, never again, we're going to build our own solar plant, solar manufacturing. But it's a government decision whether to decide that $1 trillion worth of panel purchases from China is tolerable, or are you going to manufacture yourself, or go into partnership with India, for example, to manufacture an ASEAN-India arrangement. And finally, I come to something that we haven't talked about much, and that's national energy resilience. We all learned a lot from the Russian invasion of Ukraine, where the Russians are able to destroy the Ukrainian electricity system remarkably easily because they had just a few nuclear and coal power stations. And we also learned a lot from the COVID pandemic, where trade was disrupted, heavily disrupted, almost overnight. And you can also have trade wars. But the one thing about solar and wind is that almost everybody's got it. And if you build your own solar wind-based electricity system supported by batteries and pumped hydro and transmission, then you're locking in energy independence forever. No one can ever take away your solar and wind, and it would be extraordinarily difficult for a hostile country or terrorists to seriously damage your energy system when it relies on 1 billion solar panels and 10,000 wind turbines and 10,000 kilometers of transmission and 10,000 batteries and 10 pumped hydro systems and so forth. And having this huge resilience in the face of pandemic or war or trade disruption, I think is a very, very notable advantage over being stuck with importing coal, oil, and gas. Thank you.